Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lynn Drake. I'm president and founder of Compass Commercial. And today my guest is Lindsey Engels. How are you, Lindsey?
Very well. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks for joining me. Lindsey is the president and founder of a company called Arclogica. Did I say that right?
Yes, you definitely did.
Okay, so she's the principal architect. They do residential and commercial design. Is that the right word? Commercial design or commercial?
Yeah, commercial design works, and we also do public projects as well.
Okay, great. So she's been in business for over 20 years, and she opened her own business 3 years ago, which is pretty exciting. So she's a licensed architect in the state of California. She's LEED certified. She graduated with a bachelor's of architecture and a minor in sustainable environmental from Cal Poly, excuse me.
Yes.
She's also a member of Crew, and that's how we connected. And we're going to be talking about architecture today. So thank you for joining me.
Sure thing.
All right, let's get going. So why don't you start by sharing with us what kind of architecture you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. That's great. So we do both new commercial projects, new public projects, and also new residential, but we also work on existing buildings. So they might be corporate tenant improvements, or it may be an addition to a home. It may be multifamily. For our public clients, a lot of that tends to be mostly new construction, but we do tenant improvements for cities, counties, federal as well. So that kind of encompasses, I think, most of what we do. Every now and then we'll get an oddball project as well, but that's a good start.
Do you guys do architecture and design?
Right, we do both. I mean, sometimes we'll start and it's really just a site layout and we don't get past site planning just because the client's like, okay, now I see what I can do and I need to come up with more funding, and we take a pause, and sometimes we hear back and sometimes we don't. Other times we take it all the way from planning through, assisting during construction and project closeout and getting the certificate of occupancy. So it varies a lot project to project.
So tell me, when should a person bring in an architect?
It depends on what they're trying to do. If they're at site selection, I would say bring in an architect then, or if they're even looking to, if they've never leased before and they're looking for the first place to lease, or perhaps they had a ton of growth and they want to review a building that they may be leasing, but they have to do a significant amount of TI, like it's not move-in ready.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, I would say you want to hire an architect. Going back to site selection, anytime you have to do site selection, I would say hire an architect, because you really need somebody to look at, okay, how many parking spaces are you going to need, which sounds like a really weird thing that you would need to know, but depending on what your occupancy type is, like, are you a standard office or are you a medical office, or do you have some light manufacturing, or whatever it may be, the different occupancy you have determines parking numbers, and you may not have enough parking on your site. And that's actually something that comes up pretty commonly. The other thing too is we can look at the building and do kind of a really rough schematic plan for you to see if you can really fit everything that you need to fit in the building. And it doesn't take too long for us to knock either of those out and do that quick research. So it's kind of like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? You don't want to invest a ton of money or sign a lease only to find out it's not going to work for you, or it's only going to work for a year and you want to stay there 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. So helping with just do that research and check that it's really going to work for you is really helpful.
So you guys are doing the designs. Are you also taking the designs to the city to get approved?
Right, we do that, and we also have an expediter that we'll hire out if the project's farther away or whatever. So we can cover pretty much anywhere in the state of California.
Okay. What's the biggest mistake you see business owners running into when they're trying to acquire or purchase a building themselves?
So it's interesting because we don't see as much as of the acquisition process as I think that we should.
Mhm.
And so how I end up seeing it is a building owner will hire a contractor a lot of times and say, okay, just do this over here and just do this. And well, we don't like the stairs. We want to switch out the materials that are on them, the finishes. And next thing you know, they're getting red tagged by the city because somebody reported the construction and saw,
Mm.
construction trucks with materials going in and out. And then they get shut down completely and what's called red tagged, which means the city holds your construction until you get permits. Um, so a lot of times I'll tell my employees, hey, we just got another project. It's red tagged, which means hurry up and get that to the city as fast as possible because they can't do anything and they can't use the building until our plans are approved, but also the construction is complete. So I think that would be the biggest thing is people trying to get away from permits because I know they take a while, but doing it right and not running into problems later, especially when they then become urgent, is just a better way to go. And if you have unpermitted work and something happens, there's a fire, whatever, that could run into some problems with your insurance as well. So just
Absolutely.
keep that in mind.
Absolutely. I used to be a planning commissioner, and Big Beaver is an important street in the city of Troy. A lot of the businesses are there. And I don't know how this happened, but this doctor rented an office space. It was not a medical space. Must
Mhm.
have gone without any permits. Somehow got the
Oh,
whole, this is a long time ago, got the whole thing built. And it was beautiful, by the way. And the city came in and closed them down. Never was able to reopen. The building wasn't a medical building, nor did it fit any of the criteria of being a medical
right.
building. So I will never forget that because I remember when it went on the market and spent a lot of money. It was really beautiful. It's kind of sad.
Right. Because as an architect, we know exactly how to check your zoning and everything to make sure that use is allowed
Mm,
within about 15 to 20 minutes.
yeah,
And we know like what county sites to go to and, what city sites depending on, how you're in, how the site you're in is in, whether it's in an incorporated area or not, that sort of thing. So, I mean, to pay somebody less than $100 to look that up and make sure you're okay, like, why would you not do that? But a lot of people just go for it and they don't think about it.
that's a good point. So I was a planning commissioner, so I always do that. But
Mhm.
what I find that with a lot of real estate agents is they're calling me on, I have really only 2 listings, but they'll call me and they want me to give them the zoning. And I'll give them the ID, the number, but they want me to tell them if they can use it for marijuana.
Oh yeah, we're
I'm
getting
not
that
going to do
question a good
that.
amount.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to. I'm not going to make that. I'm not an attorney. I'll just give you the ID, the number that it's associated with the code number, like C1 or business district 1 or 2. But not. I'm not going to identify what you can put in there, I guess.
Right, but most cities, their municipal code will lay that out, and from what we found with marijuana, you need to do what's called a conditional use permit, where you go to the city and just say, hey, this is what I want to do here, and can I get it approved or not? And you'll talk with the city planners and perhaps the planning commission, and it may go to city council to get it approved, but especially for marijuana, that's the way to go. And
Right.
if you follow the rules, it takes a bit of time, but it's pretty simple. If you just try and build something out and then go backwards, then it's an absolute mess. Also, because in a lot of areas, it's still, or I should say, a lot of states, it's still a controlled substance, and
Right.
those controls are in place for a reason. So if you're violating them, then you may lose your chance to even have a place there.
Mhm.
So, very good question. And like I said, we are more than happy to do research for any company looking into anything like that.
Right. And that's super important.
Right.
So if a client was looking to buy a building, or
Mhm.
excuse me, let me back up. If a client is looking to have a building built, okay, so they're out looking at land, when
Right.
should they bring you guys in?
Uh, Usually when they first start trying to select a site, or I shouldn't say, I mean, we can help with the actual site selection and looking for that, but generally they know where they want to be.
Mhm.
And once a client has narrowed it down to a few sites that they really want to look at, that's a great place to get us involved, because then we'll start looking at the parcel maps and pulling information, pulling deeper zoning information, checking for easements. If they're really serious and once they do select a site, then we also recommend getting a surveyor on board pretty immediately to determine anything else that may not be there, or like may not be obvious, I should say. Um, and then lastly, another thing that we always ask for is to review the title report. And although sometimes clients know and sometimes they don't, we've run into situations where people may have something like a cell tower lease on their property, and the people doing the site selection are not in touch with the people that know there's a lease on the land. And so we usually ask to go out to the site and take a look around for anything notable that may stand out to us. Like we may see um, different flags for a gas pipeline. I mean, that would come up in the easement, or we may see something in the street that tells us, hey, there's something going on here that we need to look into, or overhead lines and the easement doesn't show up on the parcel map. So we kind of do deep dive research to make sure they're not going to have any reason that they can't build what they think they're going to build. Another example is in Truckee. We had a site we were looking at, and when we saw the area that was cut out of the parcel to be set aside for, I guess it was a wetlands area, so it was like protected, even though the owner owned the land.
Right.
They couldn't use about 60% of their site, and we did a deep dive on the zoning, and we still had to have a setback from that so they could park, up to what was in the setback, but then the building face itself needed to be an additional, I think it was 50 feet back. So when you chop it all up, it was really just an unbuildable site. Or in
That's
Laguna
pretty
Beach,
common. Yeah.
yeah, one more example is in Laguna Beach, we had a client who was looking at purchasing land. He was a repeat client. And he said, hey, can you look at the site for me real quick? I'm thinking of looking at this. And I said, hey, this isn't buildable because in Laguna Beach, if the slope of the site is over 45%, which is pretty darn steep, you're not allowed to build on it. And that's in their municipal code. So I wouldn't pursue it. And he was like, oh, thanks. I knew there'd be a good amount of structural to build on the side of the hill, but I didn't know that that was going to be outright denied. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, you just saved me a good amount of looking into this and getting that rolling. So there's a lot of weird things where we look at it and it's red flags to us. But to anybody who's not normally looking at parcels, it's going to, and how to build on each one, they're not going to stand out to that person, right?
Right.
So,
You brought up cell towers, so that's what I used to do for a living. I used to acquire them and get them zoned. One of the things I often see, just a note for the listeners, is that the cell tower may not be included in the parcel that they're selling. And the seller might include an easement to get on and off that property,
right,
because cell towers generate a lot of rent, particularly these days when you have multiple carriers on one tower. So
right.
that's a red flag for sure. And also, like you were saying, making sure that there's no easements across the middle of a property. So those are all really good points. Let me ask you another question.
Sure.
If someone's looking to hire an architect, what kind of questions should they ask before they bring them on?
Well, we usually start by asking the client a good amount of questions like, what are your goals? What are you trying to do here? Uh, Wherever you are now, why are you moving here? What are your motivators?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Once we start asking those questions, then we kind of go back and can ask them a few more, and then they'll start asking us a good amount of questions, but we'll kind of prompt them and get the conversation going, because I don't know if there's any way to tell, because every situation is very, very unique, right? So I don't know if I could give some very specific questions. One of the biggest things, I guess, if you're just vetting architects, is to ask, how much experience do you have in this?
Mm-hmm.
Who are some of your major clients that are similar to us?
Mm-hmm.
Um, can I have an hourly contract? And the reason that could be good is if you ask for fixed fee, the architect may say, okay, 50,000, $15,000 to look into these 5 different sites and or buildings and whatnot, but you may rule out 4 of them like right away off of very simple things, and you're stuck with this flat fee. Where we recommend when you're in that stage to do it hourly, because you may only use maybe 5 hours of our time, and that's a whole heck of a lot cheaper. And so you only pay for what you use.
Mm-hmm.
And so ask how their billing structure is, and if that's something that's negotiable or flexible depending on what the needs are. And I think that's a good start.
Okay, great. Anything else that pops into your mind that you'd like to share with us?
I mean, when you were talking about the cell towers, it reminded me of one project I worked on in the past, where it was a library. I won't state the city, but in this city, it was a half vacant lot and a half really old building that got demolished. And they had what looked like a mobile cell phone tower on their site, because there was a tower, it had the antennas, but it was on a thing with wheels, right? So we're like, okay, whatever, we didn't think much of it. But the city had a 50-year, not 15, 50-year land lease with AT&T to use that cell tower. And although AT&T owned the equipment, like you're saying, there's other cell providers that use it too. And so the city's like, okay, well, this is ridiculous. We're just going to buy out of the lease. And trying to buy out of the lease was like millions and millions of dollars, because it was a 50-year lease. And so the city's like, okay, trying to buy out of that lease is more expensive than the construction of the entire project.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up having to incorporate and hide very well the cell tower equipment into our building. And so, yeah, there's a 50-year land lease, but now we set it up so the city could easily renew that lease, and AT&T can easily upgrade and replace their equipment. And it's pretty seamless into the building that it just looks like it goes there.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of trying to, I mean, we're in Southern California, there's a whole heck of a lot of trying to camouflage cell phone towers as like palm trees and different things that you're like, why did you even try? I think it looks a bit more awful than if it was just a cell tower. But that was an interesting lesson learned, because I'm used to hearing about 10-year leases, occasionally 20-year leases of tenants in buildings, but never a 50-year lease on land for a cell tower. So anything with utilities is generally a really serious, you got to look at it. Another thing too is we had another project where the power utility ran a power pole along the site, but they had guy wires coming down to brace poles, you know, the diagonal wires.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, hey, you have no easement on this property to drop that guy wire, and, you know, we need you to move it. And SCE was like, no, we don't have to. I'm forgetting the name of the term at the moment, but basically, if something's been there 5 years or more and it's been out in the open,
Yes.
Oh man,
It's considered notice.
Yeah, we have a term for it in California that's different, that's escaping me at the moment, but basically they have a right to be there. And
Yep.
yeah, and so they're like, sorry, tough luck. But if you want us to move the guy wire, we will, but you have to pay for it. And we were like, okay, well, now we got to work around this guy wire or figure something else out. And it was just interesting. So yeah, anything with utilities is you don't just move it. It's much more serious than that.
I think you bring up an interesting point, because a lot of developers, they'll give these dates, like, I'm going to have this up in 9 months and you can move your clients into it. And first of all, it takes the utility companies a bit to get those utilities moved to that site. So they can't always promise, or
Right.
make promises that they can't keep because they're not in control.
Right. If we know utilities have to move, we start that pretty much at the same time we put pencils to drawings. I mean, that's an archaic term. It's really the computer, right? But as soon as we start designing, we already get the utility on board, because that alone could take 6 to 9 months. And so, the term that was escaping me was prescriptive easement.
Oh,
I think that's what it's called in California.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so the utilities, there's like a whole weird approvals process, and every step of the way takes about a month, and there's about 9 steps. It sounds
Mhm.
almost like an AA 8-step program, and by the time you're done, it's, it feels like it's been almost a year. And then the public, like the city public utility, whatever equipment gets installed, they have to approve it as well. So there's just a lot of players behind the scenes whenever you move something for utility.
Yeah, one of my very first deals, they were talking in the early 80s here. I was sent out to look at our properties. I was working for a big trucking company and I didn't know any better. Luckily I took pictures and I got to the property and there was a driveway going right through the middle of our property.
Mhm.
And they had to take legal action immediately because they would lose the right to use that land because if it was there. I think it was 7 years in Michigan. After 7 years, it becomes the person that's using it's their property or they have the right to use it.
Yeah, it's like they don't own it, but they forever have the rights to it if they
An easement.
openly, and the way California describes it in the rules is very funny. You have to openly use it with hostility or something like that. And I don't know, I mean, hostility in a legal term, I think is very, it's not like it's actual hostile and you're standing out there with weapons or something crazy like that. But just to be like you take a lot of assertiveness and you're very clearly using it openly. Yeah.
Yeah, this had two tire tracks through the middle of the property, so it was pretty clear. And it
Right, right, right,
been
right.
more than a day. Anyways, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Not on that, not that I can think of. Well, I mean, on a different subject, I would say anybody who's purchasing or even leasing an existing building, another area that's really good to have an architect and sometimes also a structural engineer come in
Hmm.
is to do a quick run through of the building in person, to do an assessment and give
Hmm.
you a written assessment on anything that they see that may be a problem. Architecturally, we're looking for a lack of ADA compliance in both the parking lot, the entry to the building, and the restrooms most specifically.
Hmm.
Um, we usually go first, and if we see something weird, we will flag to have a structural engineer come in. For example, we had one building where we saw some cracks in the tilt-up concrete panels, and
Hmm.
we were like, ooh, the way it's cracking is really not good. And the concrete was falling, which means it's kind of breaking, like chunks of it are kind of popping off from the rebar, for lack of a better description.
Hmm.
So we were like, what is going on here? And it was determined that the building was built with a bad concrete mix,
Hmm.
and there's not really a true way to repair it, and it
Hmm.
structurally just wasn't good. And so that sale ended up not going through because we were able to see that in person, and to assess that and let the client know, like, we can't just patch the few areas that have spalled. This is a building wide problem, and you will have the problem for the life of the building. And the older it gets, the more it's going to do it, and you're going to have trouble selling this building later if you decide that it's just too much maintenance upkeep for you.
Absolutely. Actually, I just had something similar. We took a architect through, one of my clients is buying a building and he identified two or three things. So we had to bring people back.
Mhm.
We bought a structural engineer and we needed to bring a plumber. I think we ended up not going forward for other reasons, environmental issues actually. But yeah,
Okay.
there's a lot of things when you're buying a building that need to be looked at. So it's like she's saying, the structural, it's important.
Right.
Um, and can you build on it?
The other thing that we also look at, waterproofing. That's a big deal. And so we'll get up on the roof and make sure that it's looking like the roof is in good condition. I mean, ultimately, when it comes down to that, we don't replace a building inspector, or like, like if you, like when you buy a home, you have a home inspection done, right?
Mhm.
There's a similar process for commercial real estate, and that really needs to be done. But sometimes you want somebody there, just pay them for an hour to kind of do a quick look and see if there's anything serious before you invest the money to pay somebody thousands of dollars to do a really full inspection of the building to see what they see and say and what they report back.
Yeah, that's really critical. I had a great guy here. He retired as like inspector. I'm like, yeah, there's no,
They're hard to find these days. Not
they're
a lot of
really
people
hard to
do
find.
that. Yeah. And the
Um,
really good ones, like they're irreplaceable.
Absolutely. I remember we brought him into a building and we brought an HVAC guy into the building. And the HVAC guy was pretty good. But this inspector, he had also worked for a township. So he understood a lot more perhaps than a traditional inspector. And he said, this is put together, this won't pass code in this city. And
Yeah.
and the other guy just totally missed it, probably because it's a code just for that city, but he knew the codes.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. So good people.
Although it may not pass code, a lot of times when we get situations where that goes into plan check, there are things that are grandfathered in that the
Mhm.
city realizes like you just can't change it and they'll allow you a variance depending on what it is. It's not a guarantee, but sometimes you can work with the city, and especially if it's a historical area, they're like, yeah, it doesn't pass code, but like you got to try your best and we'll work with you to figure out what trying your best, really means.
Great.
And so it does come up too.
Well, Lindsay, I really appreciate your time today. Can you share with the audience how they can reach out to you if they'd like to work with you?
Sure, we can be reached by email. If you want to go to our website, arclogica.com, ARCLOGICA, there is a form on there and you can send information that way. That goes out to everybody. So if I'm not available, that'll work. Or you can email hello@arclogica.com directly and we'll forward you to the right person in the office to get you helped out.
All right, great. I appreciate your time today. You were really informative. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. And thanks for your time as well, Lynn. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.